1990s, Apple introduced to the marketplace its first product, the iMac. The iMac was coming on the scene at a time when the internet began to really take off. So the I stood for internet, which was interesting because one of the things that they had there in their campaign was the idea that it would be easy to get onto the internet with the iMac. And somewhere around 2001, the Apple company brought to the marketplace the iPod. The iPod allowed you to walk around with 1,000 of your very own songs on your hip. And by that time, the I in front of their products took on and began to morph into slightly different meaning for the individual. I meant it was for me. And so I have my iPod, my iPad, my iMac, my iBook. And the center of it all is what is at the heart of Apple's company, which is to push the human race forward and to increase our individualism and creativity. But the iPod and iPad and the whole campaign actually came behind a mentality that was already prevalent here in the United States, at least, and probably wider than that, which was brought on possibly in the 70s and 80s with the Have It Your Way campaign of Burger King. And so now I have my iPad, my iPod, my iMac, my iBook, my iMacBook, because I can have things my way. And around that same time in the late 90s, Sprite introduced to the marketplace the idea of image. And they told you that image is everything. And that your image is everything, so what should you do? Obey your thirst. And so now I have the iPad, the iPod, the iMac, the iMacBook Pro, because I need to have it my way, which allows me to obey my thirst, because my image is everything. Well, I didn't come to talk about Apple. I want to talk to us today from the subject title, I Thirst. I thirst. Thirst is an interesting thing because in its simplicity, thirst is simply desire. But when you begin to peel back the layers of the onion, you find out that thirst is that thing that animates you. It is the thing, the emotion, the feeling, and the will that motivates us to do the things that we do. We're going to see what thirst looks like. And maybe God will show us what it looks like when you obey your thirst. Here in verse 19 of Genesis 25, the section opens up here with the genealogy of Isaac. Isaac is Abraham's son. At this point, Abraham has died. He's been buried with Sarah. Sarah had died before Abraham remarried Keturah. When he remarried Keturah, he had several more sons. The Bible declares that Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac. But it was Isaac and Ishmael, not the sons of Keturah, that buried Abraham. And so right before the genealogy of Isaac, you have the genealogy of Ishmael. The difference, one of the differences that we could see right off the bat is that at the end of Ishmael's genealogy, which is at the verse 18, you see the end there, it talks about how he died, but Isaac's doesn't. Because this section is getting ready to open up the story about Isaac. Why is that important? Because Isaac, and through Isaac comes the seed that is talked about and promised in Genesis 3:15. And so whenever we see a genealogy in the scriptures, we are following the seed that will ultimately come through Mary, who is Jesus the Christ. Isaac, Abraham's son, Abraham begot Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah. Rebekah was one who was found by Abraham's servant. Abraham made him take an oath, his servant take an oath, to find for his son Isaac a wife of his own people. So he found Rebekah, who was his niece, Nahor's daughter. Well, Nahor begot Bethuel, Bethuel begot Rebekah, and so Bethuel was Nahor's son, who was Abraham's brother. And so the point is that what Abraham intended was that Isaac cannot marry outside of the camp. Abraham had a thirst to follow God and to honor what God had intended, and to continue the seed that was promised, that when Abraham stepped outside of the camp, that would be Hagar, which produced Ishmael. That son was illegitimate and not a son of promise. And so Abraham had originally obeyed his thirst for his seed, because what Abraham was worried about at first was his seed. Who am I going to give my stuff to? But what God had in mind was his seed. So that Abraham would give his stuff to God's intended promised son. And so Isaac was 40 years old, we see there, and married Rebekah. But Rebekah, like Sarah, Isaac's mother, was barren. And this idea of barrenness runs throughout Scripture, especially when you're following the seed of God. Sarah was barren, and that's why Abraham and Sarah came up with the fantastic idea that produced the illegitimate line. And so Rebekah, like Sarah, is barren, but they don't deal with it. Isaac doesn't deal with it the way his father dealt with it. Isaac pleaded with God. Barrenness will cause you to thirst. Some have barrenness in their finances. Some have barrenness relationally. Some have barrenness as it pertains to having a job. And sometimes when there is barrenness, there is a misunderstanding of what your purpose is.